Curricula is contested and contesting spaces, geographies of identity, resistance, and desire. This is an audio recording of a presentation I did at a conference hosted by the University of Pretoria on the 28th of January 2016, with the theme of the conference being Transforming the Curriculum, South African Imperatives, and 21st Century's Possibilities. I would like to acknowledge that I don't own the copyright of any of the images in this presentation. I would furthermore like to acknowledge that the original copyright and licensing regime of every image used. This presentation, excluding the images, is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial International License. In preparing for this address, I was wondering, how do we talk about curriculum transformation at this particular moment in South African higher education, considering the tumultuous and often violent events of the last number of weeks? How do we talk about curriculum transformation in an age of protest, with ever-increasing and vocal alliances of the aggrieved? Since last year, discourses in South African higher education resembled the noise, the energy, and often the discomfort of a medieval carnival, marking the suspension of all hierarchical rank, privileges, norms, and prohibitions. Bakhtin in 1984, and I quote, states that the carnival was the true feast of time, the feast of becoming, change, and renewal. The carnival was hostile to all that was immortalized and completed. End of quote. In the medieval carnival, official truths were constantly questioned and treated with suspicion and replaced by new and unofficial truths. The last weeks were characterized by, in the view of the general public and some faculty, it was characterized by blasphemous claims and counterclaims, with several mock crownings and some faculty decrownings of the Carnival King. The Carnival King, who was, in the words of Scott, 1986, quote, the Carnival King as the very antithesis of a real king, since he is often a slave or a jester. So, how do we talk in the house of intellect in an age of carnival, with hashtags like racism must fall, fees must fall, and occupy the curriculum? I want to acknowledge that the metaphors I use, whether it's the visual images or the metaphor of the curriculum as map, that metaphors are pattern-making devices that situate or locate patterns within their larger social context. But they're also decentering devices. So hopefully the images that I use in this presentation and the metaphors I use help us to make patterns, to recognize patterns, but also to decenter our assumptions and our current beliefs. Lakoff and Johnson in 1980 says that a well-chosen metaphor is one of our most important tools for trying to comprehend partially what cannot be comprehended totally. And that the metaphors we use to describe and understand phenomena are therefore not benign, but are consciously chosen to assist us in understanding a particular phenomenon, and also shape future understandings of the phenomenon to the exclusion of other understandings. I would therefore like to acknowledge that in the images and the metaphors I use, my choice was very particular and very specific, and they're not benign. They're pattern-making devices, and I chose them consciously. And I could have chosen other metaphors and other images, so the images and the metaphors I use possibly exclude other understandings, and I would like to acknowledge that. An overview of this presentation is as follows. I would like to start with a prologue to locate myself, the debate, to share with you some claims and disclaimers. I would like to share with you possible approaches to the curriculum as contested and contesting space. I would like to map the field of curriculum transformation, what is on the table and who decides and why does it matter. Then we proceed to discover and explore 4 discursive spaces of enunciation for making sense of curriculum transformation. Then we conclude with some thoughts on hope, the abandonment of hope, and the future of white curriculum scholarship, with some conclusions. And then I conclude finally with an epilogue as a white curriculum scholar. So how do we approach the question of transforming the curriculum? One possibility is that we say that everything is awesome and we actually can't understand why are some people so dissatisfied? Why these hashtags? What is happening? Why transform the curriculum? In the worst case scenario, if we acknowledge that, okay, let's change some things, then we are thinking of changing admission requirements to allow more disadvantaged students into our institutions. We often think of, okay, let us add a module 2, let's add an indigenous language, let's add a module on multiculturalism. Everything is actually awesome, but to compromise, let's add something. Another approach is to say that our current curricula are fundamentally rigged, and we really need to address issues of racism, capitalism, colonialism, heteropatriarchy, nationalism. The interesting thing of this possibility and this approach is that often these options exclude other options. So if we focus on colonialism or capitalism, we not necessarily address the others. The implications of this approach is that we need to refine what is valuable knowledge. So this will require an epistemological change. And we're getting back to this aspect. What is important here is not only the question of what is valuable knowledge, but who determines what is valuable knowledge. A third possible approach is to say that our current curricula are unfixable, and we need to formulate alternatives, that we need to hack the system, that we need to occupy the curriculum, and or hold the hand of the current system and wait for it to die. So actually this, while the first approach is sort of let's have a soft reform approach to the curriculum, the second option would be to let's think radically and focus on one of those aspects. And the third option is actually saying that our current curricula are unfixable. We need to formulate alternatives. And the implications of that is we need to redefine what it means to be human, and that will require an ontological change. I'm getting back to this meta-analysis in the second part of my presentation, that we have to make a choice between these 3 options. Let's make some of the invisible things visible. There's 2 questions I want to address. Who is asking the question? We need to ask, who are the we that must or want to transform the curriculum? Who are doing the talking? Who is included? Who is excluded? Who determines what is valuable knowledge? What are the criteria? Who are the gatekeepers? So this is a very central question in this presentation. Who is doing the talking and who is excluded and included? But a second question that I want to propose as a white curriculum scholar is that I need to ask and expose who am I, what and who gives me the right to speak. How do I, as a 56-year-old white gay male, talk about and participate in talking about the transformation of the curriculum? How do I disentangle my tentative contribution from my position of being a settler, of having grown up in settler communities and schools, and going to a settler university where the language of tuition was a settler language, where people of displaced communities and their epistemologies were marginalized and excluded? So who am I? How do I disentangle my contribution to this, my past, my present, and my future? So my thinking about transforming the curriculum cannot be disconnected and should not be disconnected from the intersecting and often incommensurable dynamics of my race, my sex, my gender, and my age in the particular context of South Africa and the African continent. And each of these tags, whether it's my race, my sex, my gender, or my age, each of these tags has a meaning and a penalty as well as a responsibility. So let us choose carefully which one of those tags we would like to put on the table when thinking about transforming the curriculum. As a white scholar, I would therefore like to start this presentation by acknowledging that I accept my moral innocence as an impossibility. Let me share some other claims and disclaimers. I furthermore believe that there are some things that education on its own cannot do. In the words of Tracy Macmillan Cottom, she said that degrees cannot fix the cumulative effect of structural racism that doesn't just reinforce a link between family wealth and returns to educational attainment in the labor market, but exists as a primary function of that link. I suspect we expect too much of education, as if the transforming the curriculum can solve all of society's ills. And in following and agreeing with Macmillan Cottom, there's some things that our degrees cannot fix on their own. Again, Macmillan Cottom said that to expand education in an unequal society without a redistribution of resources merely reproduces inequality. Some more claims and disclaimers. I also believe that knowledge is not an unqualified good. John Gray, the English philosopher, says the users of knowledge will always be shifting and crooked as humans are themselves. Humans use what they know to meet their most urgent needs, even if the result is ruin. I furthermore don't believe in the redemptive power of the new liberal mantra of progress and unchecked growth. And again, Gray, in a later work, says history is not an ascending spiral of human advance or even an inch-by-inch crawl to a better world. It is an unending cycle in which changing knowledge interacts with unchanging human needs. Freedom is recurrently won and lost in an alternation that includes long periods of anarchy and tyranny, and there is no reason to suppose that this cycle will ever end. I realize that this is a very cynical and possibly a very sober approach to thinking about transforming curriculum, but in my reflection on what is my role as a white scholar, I need to claim and disclaim that this is what I believe and this is what I don't believe. A final claim or disclaimer is that no curriculum is neutral. In the movie The Matrix, Neo is given an opportunity to choose between two poles, the red pole that will allow him to see the world as it really is, and the blue pole to continue as if nothing has changed. And I think we think about the curriculum in the sense that there is a truth that we should give our students a red pill or a blue pill. And I have a suspicion that most of our curricula resemble a blue pill. Actually, there's a number of pills in the bowl, and there is no one truth. So in sharing my thoughts about transforming the curriculum, let me acknowledge that there is no truth, there is no red pill. And possibly our thinking about transforming the curriculum should combine a number of pills. Let me now proceed to map my thoughts about curriculum transformation. If we accept that the curriculum is a contested space, but also the curriculum has the potential to become a contesting space, let us consider who are the we, who are the curriculum developers, who determines what are the valuable knowledges that we should include or exclude, what is included and excluded, and who determines according to what criteria. What is the role and the power of the gatekeepers? What is the role and the mandate of higher education? What is the scope and the impact of technology on all of this? What are the macro and institutional contexts and their impact on transforming the curriculum? And finally, and most probably the most controversial at this point in South African history, is the language of the curriculum. So let us start with who are the we. If we think of the curriculum as a contested and a contesting space, who are the we are talking about? Not long ago, there was this article published by Maserumule that asked why Africa's professors are afraid of colonial education being dismantled. And he points to the fact that professors play a very important role in determining what is valuable knowledge. And he talks about the edifice of the professorate. Let me share some statistics with you. In 2014 at UNISA, of a total of 504 associate and full professors, 68% were over the age of 50, and the majority of them were white. In the South African higher education context, only 14% of university professors are black. The vast majority of researchers in South African higher education are still white and male. In the context of the United Kingdom, female professors now account only for 23% of professors. And in the North American context, there are not only fewer women at the top of the academic hierarchy, but they are also paid less than men, and accounts for only 23% of the professorate. Male academics have a 4-to-1 chance of being interviewed compared to female scholars in the same field. So when we talk about the who determines valuable knowledge, let us not forget who the we are. Let us also not forget the role of publishing houses such as Pearson, Wiley, Blackwell, Springer, and many others in determining worthwhile and valuable and sellable knowledge. Let's not forget the role of the celebrity professor, who also happens to be white and male, in the context of massive open online courses offered by a range of Ivy League and other alliances from North Atlantic contexts. We also have to consider the role of regulatory bodies, industry and accrediting authorities who often don't necessarily see higher education's role as serving social justice, and that our role is to interrupt new liberal discourses and breaking cycles of economic and societal inequalities. So the who determines the curriculum question is a very important question which we often forget. Often missing from curriculum development projects are students as official stakeholders. Or maybe they are there unofficially, occupying campuses, protesting, using social media campaigns to produce counter-narratives. Let us now turn to the second question in our exploration of the curriculum as contested and contesting space by focusing on what is included and what is excluded. There is a claim that our curricula is whiter than the Oscars. So how is it possible that the canon of thought in all the disciplines of the social sciences and humanities in the Westernized university is based on the knowledge produced by a few men from 5 countries in Western Europe? Grossvogel also asked, how is it possible that men from these 5 countries achieve such an epistemic privilege to the point that their knowledge today is considered superior over the knowledge of the rest of the world? How did they come to monopolize the authority of knowledge in the world? And why is it that what we know today as social, historical, philosophical, critical theory is based on the social, historical experience and worldviews of men from these 5 countries? We also have to say, but what are the absences and the silences in our curricula? We often claim that our curricula covers a number of subjects. My question is, what do our curricula uncover? So what are the absences and the silences, and why? Who is invisible and who is visible in our curricula? And how do we make people look at you when they can't even see you? How do you make them take notice in the first place? So I would like to propose that the curriculum is a contested space, not only of who determines the curricula, but also what is considered to be valuable knowledge. And the curricula is then an arena of struggle, of contesting discourses. And Booth in 1999 said the tectonic layers of our lives rest so tightly against earlier events in later ones, not as a matter that has been fully formed and pushed aside, but absolutely present and alive. So when thinking about transforming the curricula, we often forget how the past is present, shaping the present and our thinking about what is valuable knowledge. The what of the curriculum is also determined by those who lay claim to own the future, and we forget that they will protect their claim at all cost. Let us now turn to the role and the power of the curriculum gatekeepers. Who are they, and what gives them the right to be the gatekeepers? We've already spoke about the professorate, many with a collective amnesia, with a selective memory and or a willful and a stubborn ignorance. Let's not forget the retired professorate who speaks from the grave and whose books we still prescribe for our students as if they the only voices to determine what is valuable knowledge. Let's not forget the role of the commercial curriculum development service providers. Let's not forget the disciplines, what is thought of to be included and excluded, determined by a history of the development of a discipline. Let's not forget the regulatory bodies and industry, the accrediting authorities. Let's not forget what is considered valuable knowledge by the massive open online course providers. And again, let's not forget the publishing houses and the oligopoly of academic publishers. Let us now turn to the role and the mandate of higher education. There are multiple and often contradictory claims regarding the changing role of higher education in the 21st century. And when thinking about transforming the curriculum, this is often the elephant in the room, that we have different thoughts of what the role of higher education in the 21st century should be. Curricula are therefore direct responses to the impact of currently of neoliberal capitalism, so with a plural, with higher education as the handmaiden of corporations in an age of money and profit, where academic disciplines gain stature almost exclusively through the exchange value on the market, and students now rush to take courses and receive professional credentials that provide them with the cash they need to sell themselves to the highest bidder. Blackmore talks about academic capitalism, where academics sell their expertise to the highest bidder, research collaboratively, and teaching on offline, locally, and internationally. And when we think about the role of higher education, the mandate of higher education, Diefenbach proposes that the corporatization of higher education plays an enormous role, that the university has become an organization, a marketable one with market shares. Let's not forget about the impact of globalization. Let's not forget that universities are no longer the primary producers, determiners, transmitters, and authorizers of valued knowledge. So when we consider what the curriculum should be and transforming the curriculum, we're not the only ones playing this field. And then there's a proposal by Giroux that says that higher education as moral and political practice means to educate students for active and critical citizenship. Let's now turn to the scope and the impact of technology. I click, therefore I am. I click, therefore I know. The University of Google, where networks not only include but also exclude people, knowledge, access, power. Where networks not only open up and review but also close, censor, and filter. where not everyone is connected, but everyone is affected, and where the quality of information, the need for verification, the need for counter-narratives, the need for critical engagement and confrontation is bigger than ever before. The macro and institutional context and their impact in the curriculum is another voice in the curriculum as contested and contesting space. You're playing Monopoly. One player is given all the property except Whitechapel Road. They are also given 95% of the bank. You are expected to succeed with what's left. Of course, you lose immediately. Why? It must be because you're lazy. So we often think that the curriculum is sort of a neutral instrument in this broader context, while the new liberal and capital environment in which we function impacts on what is valuable knowledge. There's talk about a runaway inequality structured according to race. So how do we transform the curriculum? What is valuable knowledge in the face of runaway inequality, where higher education contributes to the increasing stratification of society, where we see a number of unemployed classified as disposable, and this disposable population is called collateral casualties of progress, a new underclass, the precariat. So when transforming the curriculum, would the inclusion of an indigenous language module address this? How do we transform the curriculum when there's talk about pathological consumption that has become so normalized that we scarcely notice it? Where in the South African context, where our curricula is looking for a middle ground between forgiveness and restitution, revenge versus justice. And we're caught in this dialectic between apartheid, Ubuntu, and nation building. How do we transform the curriculum where we are in the age of the Anthropocene, of the Capitalocene, the fourth industrial revolution, and a new dark age characterized by global warming, by water shortages and climate refugees, by unstoppable global migrations and non-state actors with extreme weapons, to mention but a few of the elements of the 21st century as explored by Martin. How do we transform the curriculum in the midst of this context? If these are the macro influences, let's now look at higher education as an institution, and then how do we transform the curriculum where the McDonaldization of higher education with its mantra of efficiency, quantification, calculability, and predictability and control is sort of the mantra, where changes in funding regimes result in the directive that funding follows performance rather than precedes it. So how do we transform a curriculum where higher education is just becoming a big McDonald's, where the professor is also compelled to do more with less, while being blamed for the ever-expanding list of the university system's shortcomings? And I find this quite apt that in the North American context, Outbach and Finkelstein proposes that research universities will have free classes of professors, like the airlines, a small first-class cabin of researchers, a business-class section of academics who will teach and do some research, and a large economy cabin of poorly paid teachers. And when we talk about the transformation of the curriculum, in which section of this airplane does this take place? How do we transform the curriculum in the all-administrative university, where professorships as tenured or full-time faculty are becoming increasingly disposable features of new liberal higher education, as the number of adjunct faculty and administrative members far exceed the appointment of academics? Let's now lastly talk about the language of the curriculum. I would like to propose that it's impossible and possibly disingenuous to disentangle the language of the curriculum from the structural arrangements resulting from and endorsed by colonialism and apartheid. We cannot and should not underestimate the role language as vehicle of worldview, of knowledge claims, and ways of being in the world played and continue to play in curriculum development. The language of the curriculum provides me not only with the curriculum, but also coerces me into seeing the world through the eyes of that language. And the language of the curriculum forces me to participate in using that language as meaning-making system in positioning my scholarship and my being in the world. So when we think of the language of the curriculum, let us not forget that it coerces and it forces. It's a meaning-making system. It's a positioning-making system. So how do we empower our students to not only be competent in settler languages, but also have a critical understanding of the embedded and often hidden assumptions, the epistemologies and ontologies that are part of the DNA of disciplinary, settler, and other languages? We also cannot and should not ignore the fact that our students and graduates need to be able to understand and participate in local and international scholarly and societal discourses which use settler languages. So the question now is, how will we empower our students to participate in these discourses in settler languages and formulate contesting and counter-narratives and worldviews? So the language of the curriculum is not neutral. We cannot think about transforming the curriculum without thinking about the language of the curriculum. The issues surrounding choosing a language of the curricula and teaching are complex and often contradictory. Despite these difficulties, we cannot and should not ignore thinking critically about the language of the curriculum. So when we think of the curriculum as contested and contesting space, we've covered the who are the we, what is included and excluded, the role of the power of the gatekeepers, the role and the mandate of higher education, the scope and the impact of technology, the macro and the institutional context and their impact, and the language of the curriculum. And all of these different aspects are overlapping and contesting and claiming a space. Now, finally, in this presentation, I would like to explore 4 spaces of enunciation as proposed by Oliveira, Andreotti, Stein, Ahenakew, and Hunt in an article 2015. Now you will recognize what we started this presentation with. The first space is the game is awesome. Why do we need to change? Who needs transforming the curriculum where everyone can win once we know the rules? The second space, if you remember correctly, is the proposition that the game is rigged. So if we want to win, we need to change the rules. The third space is the game is harmful and makes us immature, but we're stuck playing. And that combines with another space to say playing the game does not make sense. So when we engage with the possibility and the challenge of transforming the curriculum, these 3 options play a role. When we move from the game is awesome to the game is rigged, it will require an epistemological change, a recognition of the epistemological hegemonies in the blue space. If we change from the game is rigged space to the game is harmful space, and that we need to think anew on what it means to be human, it will require a recognition of the ontological hegemony in the game is rigged space. So let us explore then also the playing the game does not make sense, where moving from the game is harmful to playing the game does not make sense requires a metaphysical recognition that we entrapped, and how do we get out of this? Let's turn now to the first space, where there's a proposition that we've never been happier, healthier, and wealthier, and that there's actually no need for transforming the curriculum. Another possibility is that yes, we can address the transformation of the curriculum, but through personal transformation. We can include some activities, an assignment, an assessment, an exam, a signature course. And problems as addressed through institutional change. So in the soft response space, where the game is awesome, there's very little need for an epistemological change. Everything can actually continue as planned with some smaller changes. If we consider that that's not tenable, that we need to transform, we're moving from a soft reform space to a radical reform space where we address either racism, capitalism, colonialism, heteropatriarchy, or nationalism in trying to make the game less rigged, to change the rules of the game. And as these authors indicate, the drawback of this approach is that we focus on one with often the exclusion of the others. If we move to the beyond reform space, then we accept that race, capital, and heteropatriarchy as modernity, and it's therefore unfixable. And then we look at alternatives with some guarantees. That we say, let's think of different ways of being human. We need to find alternatives, but it's still a fairly safe space. There's also the possibility to hack the system, and then there's also this possibility to hospice the system. Now, these authors write that system hacking involves creating spaces within the system, using its resources where people can be educated about the violences of the system and have their desires reoriented away from it. While hacking the system can generate creative alternatives, there's always the danger that the lines between hacking the system and being hacked by the system are blurring. The third option in this game is harmful space. Hospicing acknowledges that though new systems are necessary, alternatives articulated within modernity's frames will tend to reproduce it. Hospicing, in the words of the authors, entails therefore sitting with a system in decline, learning from its history, offering palliative care, seeing oneself in that which is dying, attending to the integrity of the process, dealing with the tantrums, the incontinence, the anger, the hopelessness, cleaning up and clearing the space for something new. And as these authors warn, hospicing comes with no guarantees about the outcomes, the length of the process, and the difficulties and frustrations experienced in letting go. Hospicing therefore involves and requires a willingness to learn enough from the recurring mistakes of the current system in order to make different mistakes in caring for the arrival of something new. And as these authors say, it demands a kind of courage that is unneurotic, that is not invested in self-information, a kind of courage that helps us to look the bull in the eye, to recognize ourselves in the bull, and to see the bull as teacher, precisely because it's trying to kill us. In the last space, there's this open space, according to these authors, where they say there is a possibility of other modes of existence based on different cosmologies. So we've seen the epistemological shift to the ontological shift to the metaphysical shift, and then they say that there's another possibility, but they don't explain that and engage with that. And as you see, we must make choices. The curriculum is a contested space, but we can also use the curriculum as a contesting space. The first two spaces are called the modernity's life support, while the second space is called modernity's palliative care. And in which one of those sections will transforming the curriculum fall? I'm wrapping up this presentation. Let's just recap. So we focus on those different aspects of transforming the curriculum. And in the second part of the presentation, we explored and thought about the game is awesome, the game is rigged, the game is harmful, and playing the game does not make sense. And each of these options and possibilities, all of the above role players actually play a role that we will have to ask the question, who are the we? What is included and excluded? What are the role and the power of the gatekeepers, the role and the mandate of higher education, the scope and impact of technology, the macro and institutional context and their impact, and the language of the curriculum. In this epilogue, I want to acknowledge, where does this leave me as a white curriculum scholar? I cannot not be white, and I cannot undo what whiteness has done. I can only start from where I am and who I am. I therefore cannot undo my whiteness. I carry with my race its legacy, its guilt, its penalties, but also its futures. And Maudlin says, as white scholars, we are overwhelmed by the weight of our own complicity and unable to submit to racism in irreconcilability. We yearn to rationalize it, to cure it, to erase it, to control it. We do this in part by fitting it into our progress narrative, asserting that we have valiantly overcome our own racism, and we imagine a future in which racism will no longer exist. But then Maudlin suggests that we must acknowledge the ways that white supremacy continues to shape the field, and we as white scholars need to relinquish the hope that we can preserve the humanist project without invoking its racist assumptions. But as a white scholar, I don't want to give up on hope. And I conclude with this quote by Young in the foreword to Wesley, Zimmerman, and Patton that says, "Maybe comes with no guarantees, only a chance. But maybe has always been the best arts the world has offered to those who set out to alter its course, to find a new land across the sea, to end slavery, to enable women to vote, to walk on the moon, to bring down the Berlin Wall. Maybe is not a cautious word, it is the fine claim of possibility in the face of a status quo we are unwilling to accept. After all, without hope, there is little that we can do." I thank you for your attention. I uploaded the full text of this presentation on researchgate.net, and the references referred to in this presentation follows on the rest of the PowerPoint. I thank you.